Thank you very much. And along with Mark, I want to welcome you to Chapel Hill, the greatest small city, the greatest city in America. And so to continue this conversation, I appreciate Jay's comments, particularly about the importance of community investment. And I appreciate Robert, who I've met before on a different panel, talking about the need for affordable housing. But I want to start by asking you all a question. How many of you actually think affordable housing is a problem in your city? Okay, how many of you, when you ran for office the first time, ran saying affordable housing is a problem in my city? With fewer hands. I did, but I was told not to. I ran for the first time in 2003, and a former council member who was my number one advocate, number one person urging me to run for council said, be quiet about that, because there are going to be people in Chapel Hill who believe that what you're saying to them is that you're going to do something to wreck their property values when you talk about affordable housing. That was over a decade ago. I foolishly did not take his advice, and I won anyway. But I did that with some confidence because there was already a council that Mark was on that had maybe not run on a platform of affordable housing, but they had taken the very tools that they had in their hands and, as Mark alluded to this morning, began by using the very valuable, tremendous power that you have to legislate when you encounter an upzoning situation. This is just an example of an affordable home in our community. So they started with that and had really tremendous success. Now, to give you a framework, I'm going to talk about basically my talk is basically in two parts. I'm going to talk to you about the evolution of the ways in which we have gone from that upzoning negotiation, which we still use, to creating an actual inclusionary housing ordinance. And then I'm going to shift to the rental economy because I'm sure all of you are aware that that's really where the action is right now, and that's a really, particularly in North Carolina, an even harder nut to crack. But starting with the ownership model, in which what we try to do is extract from market rate developers a percentage, typically 15%, of affordable units in a development over, say, 5 housing units. And those units must be permanently affordable, and they must be a shared equity model. And we have a partner, we have a community land trust that was actually commissioned by the council to provide that housing. So by the late 1990s to early 2000s, that model was working really well. But when I stepped into the picture and decided to run for council, what I saw was that, despite what Mark said, not everything we do is an upzoning. There's a lot of Chapel Hill in which you can develop and not have to have a rezoning. Also, this did not apply, what we were doing did not apply to subdivisions. So there was a tremendous gap there that the new idea I came in on was meant to address. So we put together a stakeholder committee and just put our heads together to try to draft an inclusionary zoning ordinance. It took 4 years. That's kind of ridiculous that it took 4 years, but it's because we wanted to get it right. We had Chapel Hill as a university town. There are a lot of smart people who have opinions and who want to get it right, and we had to think about floor area ratios. Any of you have floor area ratios even? Yeah, okay, 1 or 2. We had to think about that. We had to think about what is the right density bonus that we want to do. So it took us some time. And guess what? We passed it in 2010, right after the housing crash had just sort of come into full flower. So we haven't really actually even used our inclusionary zoning ordinance very much yet. We're still dependent mostly on the power of legislation in upzonings. But through both of those tools together, we have managed to get, through our community land trust, over 200 units built and for sale and occupied on the ground in Chapel Hill, and over 300 in all are on their way. Here's this is an example of a land trust house. Now, if any of you are actually interested in pursuing an inclusionary zoning ordinance model, I can offer some advice for you. You do need to engage your community. Just get out there and talk about it. And it may be easier than you think, particularly in today's climate. There was a Ford Foundation study from earlier this year that said that 52% of Americans think that their local governments are not doing enough to support affordable housing. Capitalize on that. Talk about it. Get your community engaged. And there are actually smart ways and smarter ways to talk about affordable housing. And Robert's place, the National Housing, the Center for Housing Policy, if you go to their website, and I'm not sure this is a resource in our packet, but should be, is that, okay, they have regular webinars about how to talk effectively about the need for affordable housing. Engage your community. Look around for resources. When we passed our ordinance, we had the North Carolina School of Government to help us. We had our local Council of Government, Triangle J, that had some information. There was a national group called Policy Link that still exists. Today, there's the National Community Land Trust Network, there's the Center for Housing Policy, there's Enterprise Community Resources, there's all kinds of places to look. There's no excuse, there's no lack of information. You also have each other in this network. Also, you need a good partner. You need a strong nonprofit, at least one, to help you provide this housing and take care of it, unless you want to get in the housing building business yourself, which I suspect you don't. You also need to realize that this is a very complicated matter, and it did take us 4 years to get to the end of the process, and during that process, we did hire a couple of consultants to help us, because you can't just do this unless you have a particular technical knowledge of how to draft this kind of ordinance, how to do a nexus study that really identifies the need in your particular community, and things like that. And then finally, I'll just reemphasize, you have the bully pulpit, you have the statistics, you have the facts, you can lead this kind of process. This is another example of a community land trust home in one of our suburban neighborhoods. Now, these are rarer and rarer because A, Chapel Hill is built out and we don't have much room for more suburban neighborhoods anymore, and B, as you know, banks aren't financing them. It's not where the market is right now. So we had to start thinking about how are we going to deal with affordability in a new rental economy. So last summer, we put together a different task force and said, okay, guys, no more 4 years. We're not going to mess around here. We want to come up with some recommendations for an affordable rental strategy for Chapel Hill, and we want to do it by the end of the summer. Some people thought we couldn't do it, but we did. So we continued through that effort to highlight the need, and we also realized that we were not going to be talking about drafting an ordinance. We were going to be talking about non-regulatory solutions, partnerships, really a lot like Jay was talking about earlier. We had an interesting set of people in the room, including a nonprofit housing developer from Raleigh, from a company called DHIC, which has a strong track record of creating low-income housing tax credit projects. Chapel Hill is not a good target for LIHTC projects because the cost of land in Chapel Hill is very high. So DHIC had been wanting to do a project in Chapel Hill for years and had not been able to figure out how to do it. During these conversations, a number of threads came together in a very happy way. Chapel Hill as a town was thinking about its assets. I think this had been mentioned before. I think Jay mentioned this. As the town, we were thinking about, well, do we have some underutilized properties that we're really not using for a public purpose or particularly any purpose that we can use to help with affordable housing? And this property that Bart mentioned that some of you saw if you went on the Ephesus Fordham tour that was designed to be an expansion of a cemetery, that emerged as a very likely prospect as a piece of land to be used for this purpose. And it also happened to be right adjacent to what was the early definition of the Ephesus Fordham zoning district. So this idea emerged that there would be an affordability solution within the Ephesus Fordham form-based code district, and would be largely met through a low-income housing tax credit project on this site. So we had all of those threads coming together in a very exciting way, and the partner that we chose, or that kind of chose us, is very expert at this. Now, as you know, as you heard earlier, we just found out that the application for that tax credit did not succeed, and so we will follow Jay's advice. We will be patient. We will let the land sit for a year, and we will come back and try again. And we will do our best to soothe the community's concerns about that, but we're going to stay the course, and we know that we have another strong chance of succeeding. So, but the bigger part of that story is the way we were looking sideways. We weren't just saying we need to figure out how to do affordable housing in this district. We were saying, well, what can we think about? Who can help us? And we emerged with that solution. We still have, I think this has been alluded to maybe already once, different states are different when it comes to whether you can legally require affordable rental rates. North Carolina is very clear that you cannot. So when we have a new rental project come before us and it's 300 units, we cannot say 15% of them have to be affordable to a certain market demographic. But if it's an upzoning, we can say, you don't have a right to that rezoning, but if you want us to rezone you, we're going to ask the equivalent payment of, say, 15% affordable units that will go into our housing trust fund, which we do tend very carefully and use for many purposes, and we have been successful with that. So we've seen some immediate results from this affordable rental strategy in addition to the DHIC project. The committee recommended that we dedicate 1 penny of our tax dollar, not just next year, but continuing into the future, for affordable housing. That's pretty significant. Even more significant, the council said, okay, and we've done that. So in this year's budget, there's around $700,000 that will be dedicated to affordable housing, and that's in addition to other money that we regularly spend on affordable housing. And by the way, we did that actually without increasing. We did increase taxes, but it wasn't for that. So we actually accomplished that within the existing frame of the tax rate. They also recommended that we institute a whole new town board that would, of citizens who would meet regularly, like the planning board or any other of your boards, to pass judgment and make recommendations on affordable housing components within developments, on expenditures for affordable housing, on our priorities and plans for affordable housing, and we have a very robust affordable housing advocacy community that is ready to step up and do that work. They also recognize that if we're going to have all of this new and rededicated and newly concerted emphasis on affordable rental and other housing, that it probably would be best if our staff organization reflected a greater emphasis on affordable housing. And our manager, Roger Stansel, has accordingly reorganized some positions within Town Hall to give us that kind of leadership and support that we need. And with the example of DHIC, other nonprofit housing developments, both in the community and from outside the community, have been talking to some of us about, hey, are there other opportunities? Are there other town properties that we might be able to do the same thing with? And in fact, I think there are. So we've kind of started the ball rolling, or I should say continued the ball rolling, because if you remember where I started with, a community expectation was set 15 or more years ago that this is a town that expects affordable housing. We're a high-cost market, but we have high expectations. And so we keep on capitalizing on that expectation, and we keep on getting results. So don't underestimate what you can do by just setting an expectation. Now, do we have all the answers? No, we don't have all the answers, and we have made a few mistakes. For example, before we had an inclusionary zoning ordinance, we had something called the small house ordinance. What we're saying in a subdivision is to a developer, well, if you'd like to build some truly affordable houses that go in the land trust, that's great. But if you don't want to do that, you can build a couple that are just something under 2,000 square feet. Is that what they were, Mark? Something like that. And yeah. And I mean, the idea, right, was that, a small house is certainly going to cost less than a big house. But in Chapel Hill, a small house can be pretty pricey. So that was really, and they only had to be small for 30 months, like 2.5 years, and then you could expand. Yeah. So we saw some ridiculous houses that sort of partially built before they, so that was one thing actually the inclusionary zoning ordinance was designed to do, was to get rid of that model. With our land trust, I mentioned we have, something like over 300 houses total, counting the ones in the pipeline. It takes a lot of money to keep those houses not just maintained, not just the condo fees paid, but to keep reinvesting in the subsidy that it takes to keep them affordable every time they are bought they're sold and bought again. So our land trust has tremendous financial challenges that it's our job to help them solve. That's a big challenge. Like all of you, we just had the global economic challenges of incomes that are flat to declining and cost, rental and housing both, that are rising. So it's very, even if we pedal as fast as we can, it's very, very hard to keep up with demand or even to make a significant dent in it. We have a light rail line that's being planned between Chapel Hill and Durham. There are station stops that are being planned right now. We need to be involved right now, Mark. You and I need to be involved in talking to our partners and neighbors along that line about how are we going to attract, create, incentivize affordable housing in the development that we know is going to follow. We took a risk with the Ephesus Fordham project on the tax credit project, right? It failed. We tried something, it looks like a failure. It may not, we hope it will not be a failure a year from now, but that's a tremendous risk to take and put out a $2 million piece of land and say, we're giving it away, and then not have it come to pass. And then, as Mark talked about this morning, the whole process of the Ephesus Fordham rezoning, form-based code rezoning, has posed challenges that have sometimes felt to us as if it was a failure. Yeah, I mean, Mark passed around the ad this morning, but what we've done is we have moved away in this case from the community expectation that had been built for so long of, you're going to bring in a huge new market rate housing development. Why isn't there 15% affordable housing in it? Well, there isn't, because we have tried to do something different. We've tried, as Lee talked about this morning, to set the code, to set the form, and to invite the developers to walk in and do it. We have many strong reasons to want to do that. We have the interest of certainty, ease of the developer's process, cost for the developer, and the hope that that will translate into profitable and attractive housing that the community wants to have. But what we did do toward the end of that process, and this is the map that you saw earlier, this is the Ephesus Fordham District, is I mentioned that I had been on a panel with Robert earlier this year, and I knew that he had a lot of knowledge about whether voluntary incentives in form-based code actually do work or not. The reason that we chose not to use voluntary incentives in most of the Ephesus Fordham area is that we don't want to take the chance that it doesn't work. We have a financial model, we have an expectation, we want to incentivize a certain level of density in that neighborhood, and so we have set a very standard form-based code in most of the district. Whoops. But this light area around the bottom, all of those on the south side of that road, we actually did not rezone yet. We said we're going to wait and study that a little bit harder and see if there is a way to, within the form-based code, set a voluntary incentive that would say to the developer, you can develop that property at a 2-story level, but if you develop it, for example, at 5 stories, if you choose to do that, we'll let you, but you have to provide a certain percentage of affordable units, or if it's commercial, to pay a payment in lieu for that. So we're testing that out, and the staff is working to see if that is actually doable. So my expectation and my hope is that we will do that for that section of the district, which will add another element of affordability to the district. But if it doesn't work, if the developer says, I'm sorry, I'll just stick with 2 stories, then we're still pretty secure in everything else that we've done, because we still have the rest of the district that will be truly set at the form-based code at the level of intensity that we have set. So all of that involved a lot of conversation, a lot of consternation. I believe we got to a good place, but just to go back to where this slide started, we don't have all the answers, and we're here to talk with you about some of the ways to move forward. So our message to you is like Ms. Frizzle's message is to all of us: take your chances, make mistakes, get messy, don't be afraid to experiment, talk to each other, use your resources, you have plenty of them. And this slide is, I guess, a preview of the bus tour, if you're going to go on the bus tour, because this is one of our buses done as a public art project. Thank you.